What's going on, everybody? Anthony Servino here with the Face Off Sports Network with my top fantasy football waiver wire pickups going into NFL Week 6. Let's get started with the big one, Tank Bigsby. Now, Tank Bigsby should be added. He should be a high priority addition for your fantasy football team. If you look at his numbers last week, over 25 PPR points, 14 touches, 129 yards, and a pair of touchdowns. But that wasn't the only game where Tank Bigsby flashed this season. In 5 games, there are 3 of them, including last week, where Tank Bigsby outrushed Travis Etienne. Week 1, he went 12 for 73. Week 4, 7 for 90. And obviously last week, 13 for 101. Tank Bigsby looks like the real deal. Also last week, and it could be because Travis Etienne is dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury, but Tank Bigsby did log one more snap than Etienne. He had 23 to Bigsby's 22. Tank Bigsby is running outstanding right now. Using the tools at RotoWire, and you'll hear me reference these tools a lot, these metrics a lot. He's 99th percentile amongst running backs in broken tackle percentage, 32.4. Bigsby is logging 54.7% snaps to the touch. That's 91st percentile at his position. More 100th percentile. 5.1 average yards after contact. And he has a 5.9% rushing touchdown rate, which is number of touches or number of carries when he scores a touchdown. So every 5.9% of his carries, Tank Bigsby scores. I'm into this guy. I think he should be one of the top ads of the week. And if you look at the upcoming matchups, there are quite a few good ones. Next week, you got Chicago, New England, Green Bay, Philly. Those are your next 4, and they are all middle of the pack or better when it comes to fantasy points conceded to the running back position. Let's go to another one, Tyrone Tracy. Tyrone Tracy, folks, there's a good chance he shined enough on Sunday where he went for 18 rushes, 129 yards. He also caught his only target or one of 2 targets for only 1 yard. There's a good chance after this efficient showing that he starts eating into the workload of Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is an above average running back, but he doesn't exactly have the skill set to hold off somebody like Tyrone Tracy. If Tyrone Tracy is the real deal, and he could be, he was one of my favorite draft picks in best ball or the FFPC with a 20-man bench, and you're taking some late shots on guys that could potentially put up some points at some point and win you leagues, win you money, win you tournaments. Tyrone Tracy was one of my most rostered backs, and he finally got his shot. He delivered only 14 PPR points. If he scores, that's obviously increased, but his yard per carry average, 7.2 yards per carry, 2 explosive runs, over 20 yards, and obviously the 100-yard game. Devin Singletary, for what it's worth, in 4 games, only 2 explosive runs over 20 yards. I'm adding Tyrone Tracy is in leagues I don't have him, and I suggest you do the same. Let's go to another one, and that's Jordan Whittington, only rostered in 34% of leagues. I'll admit when I'm wrong, and I was wrong on Demarcus Robinson, and my partner at RotoWire, Jim Coventry, he warned me. He said Demarcus Robinson, when he's the 3 in this offense, he's outstanding. But he's fool's gold when he's the number 1. When he's the number 1, like he has been, he's Demarcus Robinson. He's nothing special. And we haven't really seen anything great. He's been useless in fantasy. Meanwhile, this guy, Jordan Whittington, has now compiled back-to-back games with 12.2 plus PPR points, going for 15.9 last week. 8 targets in week 4, 5, or in week 5, he had 10 targets. 6 for 62, 7 for 89. Whittington is bringing a high floor to the table. And what's impressive in week 4, that was against Chicago, and they usually shut down everybody. Now, there's a disclaimer here. The Rams are heading into their bye. I don't think Cooper Kupp's going to be back after the bye. I have to say he could be. I don't think so. If you have a deep enough bench or some IR spots you can afford to pick up Whittington this week, I would. I wouldn't chance it. And don't wait till next week. And the reason why you don't wait till next week because he's going to be more expensive. There's going to be more people who want him, especially in leagues with fab. You're going to have to pay a little bit more. You're going to have to use a higher waiver priority if you wait till next week. If you can afford to, be proactive, get ahead of the market, and pick up Jordan Whittington this week. His next 2 games off the bye. Vegas, they're 13th against wide receivers in fantasy, but I think they're a little bit more leaky than that number suggests. And then Minnesota in week 8. Minnesota, their defense is really good, but you can throw all over them. So Whittington has a couple of nice spots ahead. Let's go to Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson is emerging into a flex play in fantasy. I don't play standard leagues. I don't play half point a lot. But no matter the format, Roschon Johnson is bringing value. Now 3 straight games since Roschon has actually gotten playing time, at least 8.6 PPR points, 2 of which he goes for 10 and last week 14. He has either caught 4 or 5 targets for 32 yards or scored a touchdown in his past 3 games. In the past 2 games, notably, he has totaled 3 scores. He's been exploiting good matchups. If you look at Chicago, their past few games against really good opponents for fantasy running backs, Indy 24th, Rams 27th, Carolina 32nd. So Roschon's a good matchup play, and we're seeing Swift go ballistic as well. It doesn't get harder. Jacksonville this week in week 6, they're 29th against the run. Roschon Johnson is absolutely in play. Then you got the bye week. Coming out of the bye, a couple of more juicy matchups. Washington, Arizona, New England, Green Bay. We are in a world, because Roschon Johnson is getting so much work inside the 5, where both DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson can be started in your fantasy lineup. Swift, obviously, in the RB2 spot, Roschon in a flex spot, but you're absolutely picking him up and you're using him if you need to this week. Let's go to Jalen Tolbert. We talked about Bigsby as a priority ad. I would say Jalen Tolbert is my top ad this week. A couple of weeks ago, you can go to the archives. I think it was going into week 4. I did a stash video on Jalen Tolbert. He's somebody I drafted a lot in the FFPC and best ball. I was way ahead of market. A couple weeks ago, I said, pick up this guy. And that was before the Cooks injury. Well, why? Because in weeks 2 and 3, Jalen Tolbert put up at least 13 PPR points. 6 of 9 targets for 82 in week 2. 3 of 5 for 42 and 1 against Baltimore in week 3. So it's not like Jalen Tolbert just popped last week. In 3 out of 5 games this year, he has given us at least 13 PPR points. This is a high-flying, a high-volume throwing offense for the Dallas Cowboys. It is predicated on throwing the football. In fact, when it comes to snap counts, Jalen Tolbert has been playing all season long. He's been keeping up with CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. Dallas runs a lot of 3 wide sets, and Tolbert has been a part of the game plan. He's targeted on 23% of his routes, and he is getting 15.3% of the team targets. Those numbers will increase with Brandon Cooks now on IR. He's going to miss a minimum of 4 weeks, including last week. And again, last week without Cooks, he garners 10 targets. And what makes it even more impressive Pittsburgh, one of the toughest matchups on paper, one of the best defenses on paper. Great secondary. Jalen Tolbert put together a complete game. What I loved about Tolbert before we move on is that this offseason, CD Lamb was a holdout, didn't show up until last week before games played. Brandon Cooks missed some time in August. Dak Prescott worked with Jalen Tolbert all off season long. And when a quarterback and a receiver does that, we saw that with Dak and Ferguson last year. Good things happen. And oh, by the way, when it comes to upcoming matchups, Detroit, 31st against enemy wide receivers. Then the bye, coming out of the bye, San Francisco, a little bit tougher, 10th. And then after that, a couple of nice ones. Atlanta, 22nd, Philly, 28th, Houston, middle of the pack, 14th, Washington, 22nd. And what a playoff schedule for Jalen Tolbert. From weeks 14 to 17, Cincy, Carolina, Tampa, Philly. And I'll say this. I don't think Jalen Tolbert gives up this number 2 job. I think coming back, we see Brandon Cooks fall to 3rd in the pecking order. Jalen Tolbert's the real deal. Let's go to another wide receiver, Tre Tucker. Now, this is anticipating and believing that Davante Adams is good as gone. Davante Adams, I would say 99.9% has played his final snap with the Raiders. I don't see him taking the field again for that football team. There are teams out there, the New York Jets, the Bills, the Chiefs. They need a wide receiver. And Davante Adams, he wants out of town. And he's going to be out of town real quick, which means Tre Tucker is going to be the guy in 2 wide sets. It's going to be him, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers. Now, Tre Tucker had a quiet game in week 5. We told everybody this week, Hoff, Steve, and I. This isn't a good matchup for Tre Tucker. Denver's one of the 2 best secondaries in the NFL against fantasy receivers. Of course, Tre Tucker was erased and held to under 5 PPR points. That's just what they do. In the 2 games prior, Tre Tucker pops for 22 and 15. He saw volume. Ignore the speed bump and pick up Tre Tucker. I think he's going to be a very solid, high-floor fantasy play moving forward, especially if when Davante gets traded. A couple of tough matchups coming up, but they're not as tough as Denver. Pittsburgh, we saw what Dallas did to them. Cincy, they're not as good as what they're showing on paper right now. Look what Lamar did to them through the air. KC, there's some production to be had, as we saw on Monday Night Football, then Cincy again. So nice matchups upcoming for Mr. Tre Tucker. Let's go to Josh Downs and Alec Pierce. Now, we're going to start with Josh Downs. And my biggest issue with Josh Downs, because he's been prolific, back-to-back games over 15 PPR points. He has seen at least 5 targets in every game since being activated in week 3, and now back-to-back games with at least 9 targets and 12 last week. He is emerging as a top weapon for Joe Flacco. The problem is Joe Flacco is not the long-term answer at quarterback. When Anthony Richardson's good to go, he's more than likely going to be back under center, and I don't love that for Josh Downs. What I also don't love for Josh Downs, upcoming matchups, Tennessee, number 1 against enemy receivers, Miami, 4th. It gets easier at Houston, Minnesota, and then you get Buffalo and the Jets. Not a great run of matchups, not a great situation for Josh Downs, but he's somebody you add anyway. We know he can play. We know he's a significant weapon in the Steichen passing attack. It's just a matter of if it's Anthony Richardson and it's a bad matchup, we keep Downs on the bench and stash him until the sky gets bluer. Or maybe Richardson gets banged up again, they put Flacco back in. Or maybe Anthony Richardson keeps making boneheaded mistakes and they eventually turn to Flacco. But we're picking Josh Downs up this week. We're also picking up Alec Pierce. Now, Alec Pierce is volatile. He has put up 2 games over 125 yards this year, 3 games with a touchdown, 3 games over 16 PPR points, 2 of which over 21. The issue is he is seen fewer than 7 targets in all 5 games. And he's only seen 7 targets once. In his other 4 games, he's seen fewer than 3 targets. This is a big play guy. That's what his role in this offense is. Think guys like Rashid Shaheed right now. And Shaheed's now starting to get volume, but for 2 years, all Shaheed was 3 or 4 targets. And if he gets you those pop games, great. That's what Alec Pierce is. He's a lower priority ad for me. But if you're in a bind, if you're in need of a spot start at wide receiver because injuries and bye weeks, then I'm fine picking up Alec Pierce. Let's go to Michael Wilson, another guy I love on the waiver wire this week. And I can't believe he's out there on waivers. He's getting better as the season goes on. His past 3 games, 6, 7, and 9 targets, 2 out of the 3 over 12 PPR points. He scored a touchdown in week 1. He's been dry since. But with the enemy defense obviously trying to lock up and lock down Marvin Harrison Jr., there are opportunities to be had for Michael Wilson Jr., who is garnering 19% of the team targets. He's being targeted on 23% of his routes. Very solid 1.91 average yards per route run. He's a solid receiver, and we know this Arizona defense, they're not very good. And why is that good for fantasy? Because when they're trailing or when they're playing in a back and forth football game, you're going to have to throw more, and there's going to be more targets to be had, and they're going to go into Michael Wilson's direction. Even when you have McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson's the ancillary guy. Michael Wilson's the guy the enemy defensive coordinator says, okay, we're going to take out McBride. We're going to take out Harrison. Let Michael Wilson beat us. He's going to see opportunities. I don't love this guy's matchups. After this week against Green Bay, Chargers, Miami, Bears, Jets, Seahawks. They're all top 11 or better when it comes to defenses who can limit and contain fantasy wide receivers. But if you're in a bind, Michael Wilson is a very, very solid play. Let's start wrapping this up. We got Kirk Cousins. If you need a quarterback, Kirk Cousins is out there. He should be added. Now, we can expect Kirk Cousins to go for 40 fantasy points, 500 yards passing, and 4 touchdowns every week. But we are beginning to see a very good version of Kirk Cousins. We are starting to see his wide receivers pick it up. Kyle Pitts pick it up. Some solid matchups upcoming. 25th against quarterbacks, Carolina. Seattle's a little bit tougher, but have they faced a team that packs a punch like the Falcons? Then Tampa, then Dallas. So some really nice matchups coming. Very solid playoff matchups. Minnesota, Vegas, Giants, Washington. Pick up Kirk Cousins if you need him. Let's say if you're attached to a volatile quarterback. Let's say if you're a Patrick Mahomes fantasy manager who's been a monster disappointment, go pick up Kirk Cousins. He's a guy that you might want to play in a better matchup because he is going to give you these spike games. And I get it. The first 4 games of the year, Cousins only gave us 1 game over 20, the other 3 under 15. But I think now that we are 5 weeks in, we are starting to see this offense click and this offense gel, and they're loaded. They're 3 deep at receiver, 2 deep at running back, and 1 deep at tight end. There's only so many guys you can cover, and one's going to get loose. And we saw that with Mooney. We saw that with Pitts. Even London had a monster game. We haven't even seen Bijan Robinson get going. So I want to be attached to Kirk Cousins moving forward. Let's close out with Tyler Conklin. If you need somebody at tight end, Tyler Conklin's getting volume. In his past 3 games, he has seen 23 total targets, 6 in week 3, 8 in week 4, 9 this past game in London against the Vikings. In 2 out of those 3 games, 11 and 14 PPR points. He is getting volume, and he is cashing in. This Jets offense, it's a little bit shaky. They can't run the ball. They've been throwing a lot. I know they don't want to do that. I know they want to run and make it more balanced, but as long as you're throwing at this high of a rate, we're going to see Conklin, Garrett Wilson, Lazard, and to a lesser extent, maybe we see Mike Williams get more involved. A lot of these guys, depending on the matchups, can be used in your fantasy lineups as long as the volume continues. And I don't see that volume going away. And Tyler Conklin, you get Buffalo, Pittsburgh, New England the next 3 games. All 3 of them, they're not bad matchups. They're not good matchups. They're middle of the pack, and they can and probably will be exploited a few times by Tyler Conklin. Now, a couple of guys you might want to be ahead of the market on: Jalen Wright, Ty Chandler. Both the Vikings and the Miami Dolphins, they're on a bye this week. Devin Achane left Sunday's game with a concussion. Aaron Jones left Sunday's game with the hip. If you want to get ahead of the market, like I talked about earlier, do it now if you have the bench space, because it's going to cost you more fab next week. Let's say you wait a week to pick up Ty Chandler, and all of a sudden Aaron Jones misses a few games. All of a sudden, Ty Chandler, who you might be able to get for a discount, maybe 5-10% now, maybe it costs you 50% in a week. Same could be said about Wright. Now, what's important to know is that Achane is only dealing with a concussion. They have a bye week. There's a good chance Achane returns. And I know Mostert's back. Every team I have Achane, I also drafted Jalen Wright. And anybody who knows me through the years, I'm not a big handcuffer. This year is a little bit different because of all the injuries. If you have Achane, or if you have an extra bench spot, pick up Jalen Wright because of all of that injury volatility for the aforementioned Devin Achane. I'm Anthony Servino. We're going to wrap up. If you like this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the alert icon so you can be notified anytime we go live to answer your questions or drop outstanding content just like this. If you have a waiver wire question or a start sit question or anything else, ask it in the comment section. Myself or one of the other guys from our podcast team will answer it as soon as we can.